A true story you must hear from start to finish. This story could change your life. The wind howled low across the prairie, whistling through broken fences and abandoned barns as if mourning what once was. On the outskirts of Dry Creek, a small frontier town with more tumbleweeds than people, stood the weary silhouette of the Walker Ranch. Once proud and prosperous, now it creaked under the weight of unpaid debts, forgotten promises, and the burden of a widowed heart. Clara Walker stood in the dusty yard, hands rough from tilling earth and mending barbed wire. Her auburn hair, tied back with a faded ribbon, whipped in the breeze. She had buried her husband, John, 2 winters ago when a freak snowstorm took both him and their last horse. Since then, she'd been running the ranch alone with her 9-year-old son, Eli. Clara's days were long, starting before the sun and ending long after it dipped below the horizon. She mended fences with splintered fingers, fed the cattle from dwindling supplies, and read Eli bedtime stories from her late husband's worn collection of dime novels. But despite her grit and resolve, Clara was running out of time. The bank was closing in. Unless she could prove she had a partner, a husband, to help run the land, she would lose the ranch by fall. The answer came not in prayers, but in desperation. One night, by lantern light, she scribbled an ad and tacked it to the general store bulletin board. Wanted, husband. Fake. Strong, dependable. Willing to stay 3 months to save a widow's ranch. No strings. Room, board, and fair wage offered. Inquire at Walker Ranch. She expected no one to respond. After all, who in their right mind would marry a stranger, even fake marry her, just to fix fences and fend off debt? But someone did. The knock came just after sunrise 3 days later. Clara opened the door, shotgun in hand, just in case. Standing before her was a man with the kind of quiet strength that unsettled a room. His hat tilted low, a dust-coated duster flapped behind him, and silver spurs clinked when he moved. "Name's Colt," he said, eyes the color of a storm. "Saw your notice. Thought maybe I could help." Clara didn't trust Easy anymore. But something about him, the soft way he spoke, the calm confidence in his stance, the way Eli peeked out and smiled despite himself, made her pause. "You a drifter?" "You could say that. Been drifting most my life." "Why help me?" "Because ma'am," Colt said, removing his hat, revealing a scar across his brow, "I know what it's like to lose everything. And I reckon I could use something worth standing still for." And so, the deal was struck. They signed a phony marriage license, nothing legal, just enough to fool the bank and the nosy townsfolk. Colt moved into the bunkhouse, fixed fences, tamed the wild mule, and turned dry soil to life again. He worked hard, never complaining, and brought order back to the disordered land. Eli took to him quickly. He followed Colt around like a shadow, eager to learn everything from roping techniques to how to whittle wood. Under Colt's guidance, Eli's confidence grew. His laughter, absent since John's death, began to echo through the ranch again. He even carved Clara a wooden heart on her birthday, proudly presenting it to her while Colt watched from the barn, smiling softly. But Clara kept her heart guarded. Nights on the porch were quiet. Sometimes Colt would hum a tune under the stars while Clara mended Eli's shirts. Other nights, he'd sit with a harmonica and play soft, aching songs of longing and the road. She never asked about his past, and he never asked about hers. That was the unspoken rule. Until the harvest dance. It was the first community gathering in months. Clara hadn't planned to go, but Eli begged. "Everyone thinks you're married now, Mama. We should go." And so, wearing her best blue dress and nerves tangled in her stomach, Clara let Colt escort her to town. As they walked into the town square, heads turned. Some smiled. Others whispered. But Clara held her chin high. They danced once. Just once. But something in the way his hand pressed to the small of her back, the way his eyes met hers when she laughed, it chipped away at the wall around her heart. As they twirled under the lantern-lit sky, she felt warmth she hadn't felt in years. She thought maybe this didn't have to be pretend. But the next day, trouble came. A man rode into town asking questions. Said he was a bounty hunter. Had a wanted poster with Colt's name on it. Not for murder, but for desertion. Colt had once been a Union soldier, wounded and left for dead. He walked away from the war, from everything, and never looked back. When Clara confronted him, Colt didn't deny it. I ran because I couldn't fight anymore, he said. Not with a rifle. Not after watching good men die for causes no one remembered. I found work where I could. Tried to stay small. Until you. You lied to me. No. I just didn't tell you everything. Because for the first time, I didn't want to run. But he left that night. Took his hat and duster and disappeared before dawn. Days turned to weeks. The ranch was saved, technically. The bank had been satisfied with the signed marriage certificate and improvements made under Colt's help. But Clara's heart was in pieces. Eli cried in secret. The days grew cold again. Neighbors offered help, but none could replace the hole Colt had left. She found herself missing his voice, his quiet humor, the way he could fix anything from a wagon wheel to a broken spirit. Eli stopped whittling. The harmonica sat silent on the porch. Then, on the morning of the first snow, a letter arrived. It was from a federal marshal. Inside was a pardon, signed and sealed. Colt had turned himself in. He told the truth, faced what he'd run from. And in return for his service on the frontier and accounts from Dry Creek townsfolk, including Clara and Eli, he was cleared. And then he came back. Not as a fake husband. Not as a drifter. But as a man who had found something real. He rode up to the ranch with a bouquet of prairie wildflowers and knees shaking worse than during any gunfight. Clara opened the door. She didn't say a word. Just stepped forward and pressed her forehead to his chest, tears wetting the leather of his coat. I came back to ask if you'd make it real this time, he whispered. She nodded against him. They married again, this time, for real. The town cheered. Even the old banker who had once doubted her came to the wedding, gifting them a silver horseshoe for good luck. Eli stood proud in a hand-stitched vest, carrying the rings. The ranch flourished. Colt taught Eli to ride better, Clara grew her garden large enough to sell at the market, and together they turned Walker Ranch into something more than just a homestead. It became a haven. A place where healing began, and hope took root again. One evening, years later, as Clara sat on the porch watching Colt and a teenage Eli race horses across the field, she smiled through tears. Sometimes, she thought, you don't find love. Sometimes, love finds you. Sometimes the most unlikely love grows from the dust of heartbreak, and even in the Wild West, the heart knows what it needs to come home.